Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
There were many, though not enough, Schindler's List-type heroes during the Holocaust, the biggest crime of the 20th century, perhaps the greatest crime in human history.
Schindler has been immortalized by Steven Spielberg's epic film, but many others remain largely unsung. And those who collaborated with the mass murder of millions and the attempted genocide have remained largely unpunished by history.
The family of our next guest were Schindler types, brave and true. They shielded and helped to escape some of Poland's Jewish community who would otherwise have perished in the death camps. Last month, he received an award on their behalf from the Polish government. He's Conservative MP for Shrewsbury, Daniel Kawczynski. And he joins us now. Daniel, thank you for that. Start by telling us about the award and about your heroic family background, please.
Well, I was told the story when I first went back to communist Poland in 1983 after martial law was lifted, and hadn't really talked about it since. But last year, I met a very close Jewish friend of mine in Warsaw, went for a kosher meal with him and his family. And I was the only non-Jewish person at that dinner. And it was an opportunity for me to recount that story that was said to me over 30 years ago. The brother of my grandfather was hiding 8 Jewish families on his farm, in the lofts and in the cellars. And the Germans found out, they surrounded the farm, and whereas he was coming back, his neighbors warned him not to return, but he said he had to because his wife and daughter were there. The Germans made him, first of all, take off his officer's boots. They made him dig a grave, and then made him watch as they shot his 13-year-old daughter first, then his wife, then they shot him. And his crime was protecting and helping his Jewish friends and neighbors.
So he perished, and his wife and his daughter, but the family? What happened to the family?
Well, so some of the Jewish families managed to escape,
yeah.
But my relatives were killed because they perpetuated that, they did that crime of helping Jewish families. Poland was the only country in occupied Europe where there was the death penalty for helping Jewish people. So people knew the risks that they were taking. And I'm very proud of the role that my family played, and obviously they paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah, so it should
be. It is
a
humbling and incredibly powerful story, almost a motion picture in itself. This Schindler's List was not, of course, confined to Krakow and Schindler himself. There was your family, and there were undoubtedly others. But anti-Semitism really did exist in Poland. Indeed, it's still present there and in other countries in Europe, where in some cases there are no Jews left. In Romania, for example, the concept of anti-Semitism without Jews is very much alive in the political system. So it's particularly fantastic that the Polish government, after all this time, have made this recognition. Tell us about the award.
Well, From the Depths, this organization is called From the Depths, which is supported by the British government, but also by the Polish government. It seeks to heal some of the wounds of the Second World War, seeks to bring communities together, and seeks to recognize and celebrate and commemorate those circumstances where Poles and Catholics did help Jewish friends and neighbors. Of course, in reality, there were bad experiences in all the countries across Europe where bad things were done to the Jewish people. Some people, as you know, collaborated with the Germans in order to save themselves.
Well, this is what happened in Netherlands, where I'm from. And I lived just 2 blocks from Anne Frank house.
Ah, well,
Different fate, ended up there.
Of course, and of course we have to ask the question, how did the Germans find out that my family were hiding Jews? Obviously somebody informed.
Yeah.
So these were very, very difficult times, because in any society there was a small number who collaborated, a small number who actively resisted. I think most people were in the middle, trying to keep their heads down, trying to stay out of trouble. But I think it's very important that we do commemorate and celebrate those sacrifices when people did give up their own lives, because of course we see prejudice and hostility to people because of their religion even today. And I'm very proud to have recounted that story to my own daughter, who's only 11 this month, and we need to pass on those experiences to the next generation.
Yeah, I think the point that Gayatri was making is that in the Netherlands, smiling liberal Netherlands, nobody seems to remember that in fact the collaboration with Nazi occupation, at least in regard to Jews, the identification of them, the enthusiastic pushing them onto the trains.
Yeah.
This is completely not remembered historically. But the Poles are somehow fingered as uniquely collaborative in the destruction of the Jews.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, just in today, in the Daily Telegraph, there's an apology for calling them Polish death camps. There is a lot of misinformation. Yes, bad things were done in all occupied countries, but there is misinformation. A lot of media outlets referred to Polish death camps. There's no such thing. They're not Polish death camps.
No, they were Nazi death camps.
They were
in
Nazi
occupied
death
Poland.
camps built by the Germans in occupied Poland, and the Poles had
Good point.
no ability to prevent that from happening. People react in very different ways when they are trying to protect their own families. I think most people would give up their own lives to protect their own children. But if their families are at risk, goodness knows what a lot of people will do. In my family's circumstance, they did the direct opposite of what was the norm.
Yes.
A father would normally always protect his daughter.
Yeah.
In this circumstance, the father ultimately sacrificed his daughter, knowing that she and the rest of the family would be put at risk if they did this thing, which is to hide Jews.
Extraordinary story. What is the political situation in Poland now? I see that there's quite a head of steam building up for reparation for what was done to Poland. Of course, it wasn't just the Jews who were massacred in the Nazi occupation of Poland, but everyone in Poland suffered from Nazi occupation. The country was completely devastated. It's only right, isn't it, that Germany should pay reparation for that?
Well, I'm very glad you asked me that question. I mean, I very much hope, if you haven't been to the museums in Warsaw, I'd like to show you one day those museums which show the complete destruction of Warsaw. After the uprising in 1944, Hitler said that he wanted Warsaw wiped off the face of the map. 200,000 Poles were killed just in the Warsaw uprising alone. 6 million killed. Cities completely flattened. And the Polish government estimates that in today's figures, to pay for everything that was destroyed would be about $1 trillion. Yeah. That is irrespective of this human misery and sacrifice. Now, of course, Poland wasn't able to claim reparations after the Second World War. The Soviet Union, as you know, instructed their satellite states not to enter into negotiations with the Federal Republic of Germany, and Poland has never actually been able to get reparations. And, you know, at the same time as the Germans are telling us that we have obligations to the European Union and we have responsibilities and they expect us to fulfill those responsibilities, it's interesting that they continue to refuse to accept their responsibilities for paying for the destruction of Central and Eastern Europe. And I, for one, intend to pursue a campaign. I've written to the German Chancellor this week, copied in the German ambassador to the Court of St. James, and I think that the Polish diaspora around the world, be they in America, Britain, or anywhere else, ought to collectively challenge the Germans to fulfill their responsibilities.
Well, include me in on that campaign. I have always felt that neither Germany nor Japan, for that matter, have properly atoned for and compensated for the enormous crimes for which they were responsible. Now, you touched there on Brexit, at least by allusion to the unreasonable demands of the EU, led by Germany, as indeed the EU is. Brexit's not going very well, Daniel. I don't want to intrude on private grief in the Conservative Party, but
I'm sure you will.
One wonders, I speak as a Brexiteer myself, one wonders where it's all going to end.
Well, it's interesting. I'm glad that we're both fellow Brexiteers. I'm not one of these people who's talked about the European Union a great deal over the last 12 years as a member of Parliament, but what pushed me into the Brexit camp was the renegotiation by Cameron. And when he brought back a fig leaf, which was meaningless, I simply couldn't sell it to my constituents. This was a once-in-a-lifetime for the European Union to understand and take on board the concerns that we had with our membership, and they chose to completely ignore those. So that's why I campaigned for Brexit. Look, I think it will boil down to one thing. Yesterday I was speaking to both Ken Clarke and Jacob Rees-Mogg. Very polarizing perspectives on Brexit and what Brexit should be and what should happen. I think it will boil down to one thing. There will probably be a compromise over payments. There will be something. They want our money in exchange for us being able to trade with them. There will be some compromise. Where the sticking point, I think, will be the ECJ. The jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. There are many Brexiteers who, at this junction in the House of Commons, really have a concern at the prospect that the Luxembourg court can still supersede British law during that transition period. And I think that could be a real difficulty for the government. So I'm waiting very keenly as to what Mrs. May says to us about the jurisdiction of the ECJ, because most Tory MPs will accept some form of compromise on most of the things which are important for us, apart from this one, apart from the ECJ. British courts must be supreme in our own country. Otherwise, we're still part of the European Union.
Daniel Kawczynski, thanks for joining us on the Sputnik.
Thank you.
Coming up next, if cars and trains could fly, it's coming. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to Sputnik. When a good friend of mine told me about the rLoop, I thought he was pulling my leg. I literally had never heard, nor even imagined such a thing.
Manchester to London in 15 minutes? Yes, please, any day.
That which I had never imagined turns out to be waiting at the station, ready to take off. Let's not miss the boat. Let's hear from the horse's mouth. I'm joined by Ilyas Vali, co-founder of rLoop. Half my children live in Manchester. If you're really telling me that I can visit them in 15 minutes, can I have my ticket now?
And you can have it for free.
How fantastic is that? How far are we from this, and what are the main barriers? Well, first of all, explain to the viewers what it is we're talking about.
Well, first, thank you. Thank you, Judge. Thank you for having us here today. What is the Hyperloop about? So Hyperloop is a new mode of transportation. The story goes, so initially Elon Musk in 2013 released
He's the Tesla man.
He is the Tesla and SpaceX man, and PayPal man, and Solar City man, and a lot more. He came up with an alpha paper in 2013, which described a new mode of transportation, namely the Hyperloop. If you think that transportation really hasn't advanced in the last 100 years, we're still using the same transportation methods as our grandparents or even great-grandparents. And there's been no advancement in transportation ever since. So Elon Musk in 2013 came up with a white paper describing a new mode of transportation. And the story goes that in summer of 2015, 2 years later, he wasn't happy with the progress and advancement of the technology. So he opened it up as a competition and offered it out to the world, to universities as well as engineering organizations to come up with designs for this new mode of transport. And from the initial announcement, there were about just over 1,800, almost 2,000 entries. And there was various stages of and milestones that we had to reach. In October, November 2015, we had to submit design reports and final design report. From the initial over 1,800 teams, we were shortlisted down to what was supposed to be 120 teams, but I think about 187 teams from all over the world arrived at Houston, including ourselves, and we were ecstatic.
That's Houston rather than Houston.
Houston. Yeah, we arrived there, and we had to present our designs in front of SpaceX and Tesla engineers. And come January 2016, we were shortlisted from the initial over 1,800, 2,000 entries down to the last 21, 29 teams. I think initially on the day, there were only about 12 teams that were awarded a signed trophy from Elon Musk, and we were one of them. We actually won the non-student category. And we were ecstatic. Our designs passed, and we won. And the most amazing thing is that it's how we formed. So it's not only just what we did, but how we went about and to do this.
Well, let's do the big reveal, because the viewers still haven't necessarily grasped what we're talking about yet. It's basically a cylinder, a cylindrical tube, in which it's a vacuum, I presume.
It's near vacuum, yes, low pressurized environment.
Low pressure vacuum. It's built
Like a pod.
like a pod,
Yeah.
above the motorway, presumably. And while the motorway will take you 5 hours, if you're unlucky, from Manchester to London, your form of transport will take you 15 minutes. Tell us how that works scientifically.
The initial idea of the white paper was that we develop a tube and we take most of the air out of it. And if you think Concorde airplanes, jet planes, they fly at very high altitude because it's low resistance. Now, if you think on the motorway, if you're driving 60, 70, 80 miles per hour, you stick your head out of the window, you'll feel the air resistance. The biggest problem with pushing at really high speeds is the air resistance. So the idea from Elon Musk was to encapsulate all of this inside a tube, suck out most of the air, so you're running in a low pressurized environment. So you don't have the issue of the air resistance, or not as much of it.
And how is it propelled then? I mean, what moves it forward?
So there were a few initial ideas. The initial alpha paper had a compressor at the front, which sucked the air in from the front. And if you think like an air hockey table, so it sucks the air in from the front and blows it out from the bottom. So it gives you that levitation like an air hockey table. And that gets rid of friction. So you've reduced air resistance, and you've also now reduced rolling resistance because of the friction and that you're levitating. And then the only thing you have to worry about is propulsion. Now, there's different mechanisms of propulsion that have been described and introduced. But for the competition, for the SpaceX competition, SpaceX built a propulsion system, which was basically a simplified version of a Tesla, and that's what gave us the propulsion.
What about boarding and unboarding? Where does it need to take place somewhere special?
And get into the tube. Yeah.
Well, imagine.
Or does it go down? No.
Well, imagine it's a new mode of transportation. Now, infrastructure and technology still needs to be developed. So how I see it is it'll take 5 or 10 years, maybe 15 years for that infrastructure to be developed.
Especially don't take too long. No. I want to take a trip on this.
Give us more control. You'll find developing countries developing this a lot faster than developed countries.
That's right. I mean, there are already countries I can think of.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Like Russia, Kazakhstan, Iran.
India, Africa.
Yeah, where there are vast territories. And where there is capital, and where it might be easier to get it through the planning committee.
Is that the main obstacle?
It would be necessarily in England.
Yeah, personally, I do think land rights and government approval would take longer in developed countries than it would in developing countries.
For sure. Yeah. But even here, I mean, it seems to me obvious. The government owns the motorway already, so the government can grant permission for a giant loop tube to be built above it. And believe me,
You would think.
the motorway will be a lot less congested in 5 days once
Yeah.
the word of that gets out.
Whilst there are discussions and planning issues, we're focusing on building and designing and developing the tech. And that's where our focus has been. We understand that there's much red tape and politics that are at play in different regions, or depending on where you would look at developing the infrastructure. But our focus is solely on the engineering.
It would be safer than the cars down below, safer than a railway, safer than an aeroplane.
Absolutely. Yeah, Elon Musk...
It's almost science fiction, this, Ilyas, you know. For most people watching this, it will be like science fiction.
You know, I come across this quite often. And most people, well, in 2013 when I started, or 2015 when I was trying to form a team together for the competition, it was mostly the same response: either it's science fiction or this guy's just watching one too many Star Trek movies. But my response to most people is, imagine we're having this conversation 100 years ago, and I said to you, I'm going to develop something that's going to be like a bird. It's going to fly you over mountains and over land and over seas, and what normally takes months to do is going to take hours to do. You'll think that was science fiction, but yeah, we've had commercial airliners since the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
Right? It's been full on since the 50s.
So is it...
And we take flight second nature. We don't think
And does
about
Mr. Musk own this idea?
Certainly he's the brainchild behind it. But the idea is nothing new. Ideas behind the Hyperloop, its initial concepts go as early as 1890. Yeah, and even in 1910, 1920s, I can't remember the exact date, there was discussion of having pneumatic tubes for the New York Underground.
Yeah.
So the idea of the Hyperloop and the concept, even if you go back as 20s and 30s, you'll see loads of images of designs and variation of designs of the Hyperloop that were done in Germany.
So the technology is more or less done then. You are one of the winners of the competition. If the money was there and the planning permissions were there, could you get this, as it were, up and running now?
We'd start building it straight away. You see, sometimes your mind goes wandering, and Elon Musk actually came up with something brilliant. He also recognizes that in developing countries, planning is an issue. So he's come up with a boring company, and he's just started digging underground. He's developing the infrastructure today, or wants to develop the infrastructure even today. So he's just started digging.
Underground.
Yeah.
As opposed to overground.
Yeah. Now, it's more expensive to bore.
Much more.
But
more risky.
If we take anything from... It's actually less risky. Engineering-wise, it's a lot simpler. But if we were to take anything that we've learned from, let's say, the HS2, it's taken, what, best part of 10 years just to get the land rights.
Well, you know, I was going to make this point, the last point. We're about to spend billions on HS2 to shave a dozen minutes or so off the journey. And here we're talking about a technology that will reduce it to 15 minutes. Shouldn't we all actually put the brakes on the HS2 and do this instead?
So my journey in the Hyperloop actually started because of the HS2. I used to come to London twice a week in 2013. And I was on the train. Our Prime Minister at the time made an announcement for the HS2, initially got passed at £30 billion. It was at the same time I was reading the Elon Musk's white paper, and I thought, well, if we're going to spend $30 billion on something, we might as well look at a new mode of transportation. Yeah. Because my connection, Manchester to London, completes at 2035 without any delays. But it only makes a journey difference to me for 40 minutes. Yeah. But the biggest issue is cost. Now, I don't know if you've ever come from the north at peak time. Regularly. Then you know how much it costs to jump on a train. It's a lot of money. It's more than...
And that's just on your own.
Yeah,
never mind
on your
family.
own, right? And it's a lot of money. Not only it's a lot of money, but in many ways it restricts us. You can't afford £300 or £200 for a train ticket to come down. And then you start looking at off-peak trains and balancing it, and then before you know it, you've lost a whole day just to come to London. Yeah. We want to develop technology, so it's designed by the people, for the people. We want to give this technology available for free. Imagine free transport 10 years from now, 5 years from now.
I'm imagining it. Ilyas, it's been absolutely fascinating. I could talk to you all day. Thanks for joining us
on
the Sputnik, which was groundbreaking technology in its day, I can assure you. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
In the words of A Life of Brian, what have the Polish ever done for us? Andrew McGuinness says, come to Newark Cemetery and see the Polish war graves. That will give you a bit of a clue.
Yeah, absolutely correct.
And then, what if cars could fly? Muriel Curie says, doesn't Russia already have flying cars and motorcycles? I would love to have a flying car. And Jan Oskar Hansen says, it would be quite a mess in the sky.
If you think about it, there'll be no cars, there'll be no trains, there'll be a tube.
Yes, exactly.
Can be transparent, could be any colour you like, it could have advertising all the way down it, 200 miles, and you'll be there like that. And when your kid asks you, are we nearly there yet, Dad? The answer will always be yes.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the time we've got for today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
But you can stay in touch with us on social media, on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today, or Twitter and Instagram, RT_Sputnik. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.